All right. My name is David Finlayson with Chesapeake Technology, and today we'd like to do our Introduction to SonarWiz 7 webinar. So at the moment, I think I have all of the audience muted. So if you have a question, please type it into the questions box. And in fact, let's start with, can you hear me? Make sure it's going out to the world. So looks like it's coming through. That's good. So the way we're going to do this thing, we have too many people to answer questions right at the time you ask them, but go ahead and shoot them off, and Ashley will be looking at them and making sure that they get recorded down, and we'll try to come back to them later in this broadcast today. If it's kind of a businessy kind of question, she'll answer it right away if we can. If it's more technical, what we're going to do is just try to group them together and answer those questions at the end of the talk. So I have about 45 minutes of stuff I want to show you, and then we'll have some time at the end for asking questions and more specific information I can give to you about your own projects. The basic gist of this today is to talk about the new features of SonarWiz 7 that have been introduced, and what is going to happen as you migrate from 6 to 7. So to give us a chance to kind of show off some of the new things that we put into the product, and also give you some heads up about what's coming down the line as you start to migrate your own licenses up to 7. So here we go. Basically, we're going to go over any recent enhancements. We're going to start with SonarWiz 6 because a lot of things were put into the product in the last 6 months, and if you haven't kept up to date on all your downloads, there have been some pretty important changes to the product even in 6. Those all migrate into 7, so we'll start with the stuff that's in 6 you might have missed. Then I'm going to talk about what is really new for SonarWiz 7. Then I'll finally talk about the migration path, how you take a project from 6 to 7, and how we recommend you go about doing that. And once I've stepped through these slides, I have a project loaded up where we can just walk you through that and sort of demonstrate live how that works. And then finally, I've left a little time at the end for questions and answers. So like I said, go ahead and type your questions in as you have them. That way you don't forget them. And then we'll try to organize it all together and answer everyone's questions at once. And of course, if you have any questions that aren't answered by this webinar, just contact us through our normal channels, through your help at chesapeaketech.com, or you can use info@chesapeaketech.com, and you can get to those help menus and all that stuff right in the program itself. So let's start with a review of features that were added into SonarWiz 6 over the last year that if you have not been keeping up with your EMAs downloads, you might not have actually seen this. One of the biggest changes to SonarWiz 6 over the last year has been a change to the way we handle color in the product. It used to be that we had kind of a Photoshop-like paradigm where you would pick a color palette and then you would use sliders to change the hue, the saturation, and the color of those palettes. You didn't have a whole lot of control over how the colors were mapped to the data, and you didn't have a lot of control over the palettes themselves. So what we introduced last year was this color window, which I'm circling with my mouse here. And what this allowed us to do is to show a histogram of all the amplitude values in your data set and to show how those color palettes are mapped to those amplitudes. And there's little slider controls that allow you to kind of pinch the palette and reset it the way you want. You can click on these buttons down here to edit them, and there's a way, by controlling the mapping range, you can set multiple projects so they all have the same colors, even though they're not in the same projects. We've also been working on seismic palettes, which are full envelope. They're positive and negative values. This was not something that was fully developed in 6, but it's fully supported in 7. And I'll come back to that again when we get to the actual 7 projects and stuff. But this has been a big change. So you'll notice that up in the toolbars, we've removed the the sliders for hue, saturation, and color. Those are no longer used. Another thing that has really advanced over the last year or so, actually more over the last 18 months, has been we've added quite a few new gridding algorithms to the program. Back in SonarWiz 5, there was only one gridding algorithm available for the whole product. Now we have several dozen actually, and they work on different data types. We have amplitude gridders, we have depth gridders. These are mostly for bathymetry style data, and we recently introduced the ability to grid your side scan files. And the reason we did that is it gives us more options for mosaicing tiles together. So if you have multiple lines and you want to mosaic them together, in SonarWiz 6 and actually SonarWiz 5 and older versions of the program, we could only do that blending in real time right on the screen, and so that kind of limited what we could do. So it was hard to get rid of artifacts where lines overlapped, and we didn't have a lot of choices for how we would blend the colors together. So by introducing the CSF side scan gridding algorithms, we're able to apply, now there's 6 different algorithms available here, some of which are similar to what you used to be able to get, like the mean and median are similar to the averaging overlap and RMS overlap that was in the older gridding algorithms. But now you also have some stuff that's totally new with this gridding dialog. There's median amplitudes can be gridded, or you can prevent overlapping lines from gridding on top of each other. It always takes the sample that's closest to nadir. Or we have this blend algorithm that will feather the edges of lines where they overlap to try to remove the seam between them. There's inverse distance weighting, which is used to fill data holidays and gaps. And then finally, this preferred angle weighted algorithm. Some projects, it's important that you always illuminate a target from the same direction, which was kind of a pain in older versions of SonarWiz because you had to manually turn the lines on and off and manually turn the channels on and off so that the direction of the illumination or this insonification was in the direction that you wanted. With the preferred angle weighting, what you do is you type in an angle that you would prefer the illumination to be from, and the gridder will automatically weight all of the gridding algorithms to prefer that illumination angle. Only if there's a data holiday does it use angles from the other directions. So it's just you can be driving the boat back and forth in different patterns and it won't matter. This will always illuminate from the same direction. So those were introduced in 6. Another thing that was introduced in 6 was the ability to do port and starboard bottom tracking. This really was important for large AUV surveys where the staves have been separated by several meters. So traditional side scan, you have a small fish where the staves are only separated by a few inches or so. But here they're separated by a meter or more. Then you'll actually have 2 different bottom tracks. And so this was introduced and is carried over into 7 as well. We've started putting a lot of work in redoing the side scan signal processing options. The first one that was introduced was a nadir filter, and this was designed to eliminate the nadir stripes that often show up even after all the other signal processing had been done. Like if we look at this example here, there's a pretty bright nadir stripe that's identified here with the blue arrow. And by using the nadir filter, we were able to almost completely eliminate it. We've also recently added, actually after these slides, we've got some destriping filters that can help get rid of these stripes, and I'll show you a live version of that. You pay a little bit of, it's like a bandpass filter, and you pay a little bit of a price in the resolution of the targets, but if you're doing habitat mapping or you want to try to blend the data set into a mosaic, you can almost eliminate all of this striping. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. There's no free lunch in any of engineering, but it can really dramatically improve large-scale surveys with the destriping and the nadir filters. Also, using those gridding algorithms that I just mentioned, you can still see artifacts at the edges of the lines, which I've highlighted here in blue. And if you use one of those CSF blend algorithms, even those start to fade away. And all of this was introduced in 6. So another big change in 6 that came just recently was full envelope support for our sub-bottom. Prior to about 4 months ago, we had the way SonarWiz would map colors onto sub-bottom data. You had to pick whether it was a full, or you had to pick whether it was just positive or negative values that were shown, or they could be folded on top of each other. But with changes that we made to the sub-bottom architecture, it's now possible to do full waveform or full envelope and bipolar plotting, which is what I'm showing you here. So this is the same data shown with the full envelope plotting. And that's when we introduced some of the enhancements to the color window in order to handle this kind of data. So let's see where. With SonarWiz 6, there's been a lot of the focus on the development was on bathymetry, and I want to skip through some of this a little quickly because that's not what I want to focus on today. But we have developed some tools that do automatic sensor detection. So if you have bathymetric data sets, you can, with Reason S7K files and with Kongsberg.all files and HiPack HSX files, you can then use the vessel editor, can query those files and automatically configure the vessel for you. So you no longer have to manually type in all of the offsets and angles into the vessel editor. You can just import them with your first track line. Another thing, a recent change was we've changed angle definitions. So if you're migrating forward an older project or older vessels, we made some major improvements to our bathymetric processing. And one consequence of that is that the port and starboard roll angles changed polarity. They're minus from each other, so they're rotating in the opposite direction. So if you have an old vessel definition from an earlier version of SonarWiz 6, those need to be migrated. And it's really easy for us to show you how to fix it, and you just need to contact us if you're having problems with it. SonarWiz 6 also introduced cube bathymetry, and this is a really powerful way of filtering your bathymetric surfaces to make sure that errors aren't being introduced into the model or into the digital elevation models that you're creating. It's an excellent way to clean up interferometric data, which is one of the main reasons that we put it into the product, especially for our side scan customers. We've also been working on some pretty nice grid filtering features, which are all in our older 3D viewer product, basically. So I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the gridding. When you have Cube uses statistical processes to try to pick out and remove errors in a data set. And here I'm showing you a model, a digital elevation model that has several different track lines overlapping each other. And I've circled areas where Cube had to go through this Cube went through this model. We haven't edited any of this, and there were some problem areas here. There was also, so we've got 3 different circles I highlighted. There's a target here that has in the upper circle that has kind of a rough patch around the outside of it. There's a small like grid structure that's in the middle circle, and it has a little bit of a roughness. And then over on the right is an area that was relatively flat. And you know, Cube does more or less a really good job of getting through all of this. But we've also been working on another algorithm that blends these data sets together, and it tends to do an even better job than Cube on some of these data types. So if you compare the two data or the structures on the left to the blending algorithm, and what blend does is it tries to weight the overlapping lines and remove artifacts. And it does an excellent job, even better than Cube, on some of these three targets. So on the left-hand side, you can see if you compare the two, the blend algorithm it completely removed the artifacts altogether. However, the blending algorithm is not as good at cleaning out truly bad data, whereas Cube was, if you look in this lower right-hand one, the blend algorithm, which I'm showing now, has an artifact in it because this wasn't clean data, whereas the Cube algorithm was able to completely remove that. It must have been fish or something that was floating in the water column. So those are all features that were introduced into SonarWiz 6 in the last, basically in the last 12 months. And now we're going to talk about what's new in SonarWiz 7. SonarWiz 7 came out in July of this year, so the first of this year. It's been out for 2 weeks. Our main focus has been to simplify the user interface, to streamline workflows. We've switched to floating point everywhere. So floating point amplitude is now used for all data types, and that's a really big change. In fact, it was the floating point change to our sub-bottom side scan that caused us to change the version number, because these changes are incompatible with SonarWiz 6, and I'll come back to that. We now have single beam support. We've been putting a big emphasis on our side scan and sub-bottom image processing algorithms to try to really improve the rendering of your mosaics and your data. And we've also introduced a 3D viewer directly into the product. So it's very easy to switch from a 2D view to a 3D view, and I'll show you how that works. One of the biggest things about SonarWiz 6 and all previous versions of SonarWiz is that side scan and sub-bottom data were internally inside of SonarWiz were stored using only integer numbers. So we couldn't handle floating point numbers. This was done because SonarWiz had an image processing view of amplitude data. Everything was built around making pictures. As sonars have gotten more sophisticated, they are starting to produce data in larger and larger, or in more and more fidelity, and we were getting more information back from the sonars. And at some point, the SonarWiz user interface had to get more and more complicated to import this data. So if you look at the screenshots I've put here, all of these screens were something that customers had to deal with as you were importing track lines. You had to set gains, you had to maybe use this thresholding tools. We had some advanced options for certain types of sonars where you had to mess with importing maximum and minimum amplitude data. There's a lot of basically housekeeping that has to be done by the user to translate whatever your sonar produced in amplitude to something that SonarWiz could actually read and display well. And I'll give a demonstration of that later. So we wanted to get rid of all of this. And now the interface is basically down to what we see on the right. So instead of having gains and auto TBG and all this stuff, thresholding that you have to mess with before you can even display data, now you can just select a file, pull it in, and SonarWiz will display it wherever it happens to be. So there's no more import gaining that you have to deal with. You still have to do signal processing. I mean, we still have to deal with physics, but the actual complicated part was getting the data to display right in the first place. And we think that we've eliminated most of that. Another area where the SonarWiz user interface in 6 had really gotten quite complicated was when you wanted to see information about or apply any kind of signal processing to a data set. We had several different places where you had to look up that information. So if you right-clicked a line and you open a Sonar File Manager, you would get a table of all the settings that had been applied to that particular data set. If you wanted to do signal processing, you right-clicked and open another set of dialogues to apply all of this. And sometimes you had context menus that had additional information that was all spread basically throughout the program. What we wanted a way is to try to simplify this so that you could click on a file and see everything that was available for that file, everything that we knew about it. And so we've introduced a properties window down into SonarWiz, which is very similar to what you'd see on a GIS program or a CAD program, for example. So now if you select a sonar file or any object in the Project Explorer, down below in this properties window, it tells you everything we know about that file, whether gains have been applied or not, any kind of signal processing you want to do. And you can either just observe these things or you can actually go in and manipulate the values directly in here. Now in SonarWiz 7, we've not removed any of the old mechanisms for setting these values. So all the old gain features are still exactly where they used to be. And I think probably for the lifetime of 7, we'll have 2 ways of doing everything. Kind of this new way would be to work directly in the properties window, and the legacy way would be to be working with the old file managers and that sort of thing. But I think that our direction is going to be more towards moving that functionality here where it's easily discoverable, and you don't have to remember what dialog or menu something was on. You can just click and look at the properties window and make the change directly in there. Here's a bigger view of this. So this little window can be expanded, and you can see it has tabs so that everything's organized in I think it's an easier way to just deal with all the information that we know about these files. So another big change in 7 is that we have integrated the 3-dimensional viewing application directly into the product. In SonarWiz 6 and earlier, we had a standalone 2D and 3D editor, and it's really nice, and we still distribute it with 7. But there was always this lag between the time you clicked a file and it showed up in the 3D editor because it was a separate program. There were some advantages to doing that, but the disadvantage is it's kind of slow and it doesn't feel very integrated with the rest of the product. So in 7, what we've done is embedded a 3D viewer directly in the program. And now it's one of the properties that you can select on an object is show in the 3D viewer. And I'll demonstrate how that works in a few minutes. That's really nice. Another area where we've been putting a lot of work in 7 is signal processing. And one of the things that have come out of that is a much better Seabed characterization tool. So in SonarWiz 6, we were able to do Seabed characterization of side scan files only. In 7, we've enhanced it so that you can now do both bathymetry files and side scan files as long as they have amplitude data. And in addition to just working with the amplitude information, you can also feed or use slope information or topographic indices as part of your classification. We've also simplified the user interface a little bit so it's easier to get to a classification or characterization. So I think there's still more work we can do on this, but we're kind of excited to see how this gets used by people. So here's an example of a data set we'll show. This is our data set. Has kind of bright areas around these rocky reefs, and it has dark areas where it's sandy or muddy. And using the Seabed characterization tool, it's pretty easy to break out those classes and export those to a GIS for further analysis. So I want to talk about migrating from SonarWiz 6 to SonarWiz 7. The first thing is that SonarWiz 6 will be fully supported until the end of 2017, and that means we'll be continuing to do patches to it and probably making small modifications if necessary. After 2017, it's going to go into maintenance mode, and all development will switch over to SonarWiz 7. So for the time being, for the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to maintain both in parallel. SonarWiz 7 introduces a new CSF file format and some minor changes to some of the other project files. Therefore, all of your SonarWiz 7 projects are, basically SonarWiz 6 and SonarWiz 7 are incompatible with each other. So when you can open a SonarWiz 6 project in SonarWiz 7 and it will convert it into a SonarWiz 7 project, but it's a one-way trip. Once you've done that, you can't open the file again in SonarWiz 6 because all the CSF files will have been promoted to the new format. So we recommend that you make a copy of your project before opening in SonarWiz 7. And probably the best way to move forward with SonarWiz 7 is to start new projects in 7 or do your testing in SonarWiz 7. Finish whatever work you've done in SonarWiz 6 and just keep going with that. There's some nice new tools in 7 and we can promote them, but there are several places where it's actually better to just start a project completely over from scratch in 7 rather than promoting it. And one of the big ones is if you've got high resolution or high amplitude data that has a large dynamic range, SonarWiz 7 handles that much better. So if you migrate from 6 to 7, you won't be able to take advantage of some of those enhancements that we've made. It'll just keep using the SonarWiz 6 amplitude data that you imported originally. So some of the things that we're working on, these are not yet in, but are soon, hopefully, will be released in 7 kind of in the near future. We're working pretty hard on getting bathymetry waterfalls in place. So all of the contact picking and everything that's available for side scan and sub-bottom will be available for bathymetry data as well, which could be really cool once you are able to do the contact management in SonarWiz. We'll be able to have three-dimensional targets and that sort of thing. And all of this is under development, but it wasn't ready for SonarWiz 7 yet. We've also been doing some nice things with acquisition, and I've got a movie that I can show you. I think I'm going to do my demonstration first, and then we'll show the movie. So let me switch here to actually launch SonarWiz 6. We'll start with 6. Because I want to show you where we've made some of the biggest improvements. Let's take just a second here. Okay, so this is a little project that we're going to use in SonarWiz 6 and 7. And I just brought some files in, but I want to remind you the process that we're trying to improve. So when you import a file into SonarWiz 6, you go to Import Side Scan Files, you click on a file, and then you're faced with this import dialog down here. If we don't apply any gains at all and we try to open this file, it often shows up with nothing to see because we haven't set these import gains right. So let me isolate that file. So here I just imported with the default, and I guess it doesn't look. Oh, I did. Yep. Here. It didn't look as good. It looked better than I thought it was going to. Yeah, do it again. Okay, so here in 6, there's data in there, but it's really hard to see. And so there was this dance you could do where you select a file, and we had thresholding. You could sniff a file, so we'll look at that, and it would try to suss out where the histogram of data was, and then you could set a gain here, or the upper and lower limits. And now you've got thresholding turned on, and then you can import this file, and it would look better. Or not. But this is the right here. This is the problem that we're trying to fix. So now let's take this whole project over into SonarWiz 7, and I'll show you. This basically have the same exact problem with sub-bottom features. This was the major motivation for us to switch over to a floating point storage format and allow us to eliminate this problem where you have to kind of align SonarWiz display to the amplitude data that you're in your raw files. And it was always tricky to do the first time you started working with the project. So let's close this and look at the same project in 7. Oops, I gotta wait till that one's done closing. Now this is the same project, but it was imported as SonarWiz 7. So now the first thing you might notice is we've added more color to the interface. So the icons are pretty much the same, they're all in the same place, but we've added additional colors so it's easier to pick out the icon that you're looking for. You can see in addition to the Project Explorer over here on the left, we've got the new Properties window. And these are all tear-out windows like the rest of the interface. And then the color window's gotten a little more powerful, and I'll show you some of the cool things that it does now. So let's go look at the import. So if we import a side scan file now, same file that we were looking at before, you'll notice none of those gain settings are here, because SonarWiz 7 doesn't need them anymore. So now, if we isolate that line, it just imports by default in it sets a histogram or a color that's appropriate for this data file, and it covers the whole dynamic range of that input. Our signal processing in SonarWiz 7 has also gotten much better. So if we go to settings, you can see we can still do just the way you would in the old SonarWiz 6. You can enable EGN, or you can turn on the nadir filters and our new de-striping filter, which I'll show. Or you can go down to the Properties window and do it down there. So you can select the file or files, you can have multiple files at once, and you just turn them on here. So we'll turn on EGN and the nadir filter and de-striping while I'm talking. Some of these filters are more powerful than they were in 6, and they can take a little bit longer. Like the de-striping filter takes a little bit longer to process than what was in SonarWiz 7, SonarWiz 6, and that's something that we're working on to make the performance a lot better. So we'll turn that's with just EGN. If we turn the nadir filter on, the stripe down the center will go away. And then we'll turn the de-striping on. While this is moving, I'm just going to move on to the next thing. So what we hope to see is that for the most part, you should just be able to import your files now without messing with any kind of gains at all. It should just automatically wrap around the way you want it. So here on the right-hand side, we've made some changes to the color control that make it a little easier to use. You can now zoom in and out on the histograms so that if your data was really compressed down into a small area, you have more control over the slider bars. We've also done some work with the palette editor so that it's a little easier to use as well. So if you don't like the color choices that we've made, it should be pretty easy to do one of your own. So this file is actually got a little, so when you've bottom tracked it, these files come in with a bottom track. We can automatically view data in 3D, which is another big change to SonarWiz. So if you go to the View menu and go to this Enable 3D View, you'll now get a three-dimensional window that you can dock. I had it slid over underneath the Presenters buttons. So for example, if we select the side scan file here, and down here where it says General Properties, there's a Display 3D View. And all you have to do to see it in 3D is click this button. And now you can see what a bottom tracked file looks like. We can see that there is a little bit of a bump where the bottom track went over these rocks. That's true of all of the data sets. So this data here has sub-bottom files in it, which we can show in 3D. and it has some bathymetry grids that we can look at. So let's turn one of those on. So now the bathymetry grid is in 3D, and now we can look, maybe we want a couple of profiles to show up in 3D. So these are the sub-bottom profiles. So I'll select one of those, and I'll say display in 3D view. I maybe want a crossing line, and that one display in 3D. So this is really, it's pretty slick. I mean, it works really well. If you want to see the side scan in there, we can drape geo images. We'll go here to GeoTIFF. And then we can just snap it right onto the, because this data doesn't have depth information, it just has altitude. So we can snap it right onto the grid. And the real-time display works right in this window too. So I'll show you a movie of that where you can see the boat and the fans coming out, and it's building the data in real time, both in 2D on the left and in 3D on the right. So what happens when you want to migrate from 6 to 7? Let's take a look at that for a moment. So if you try to open a SonarWiz 6 project in SonarWiz 7, here's what I recommend you do. So I've got the File Explorer open, and I have a SonarWiz 6 project, the one we just opened previously, and I'm going to make a copy of it. And this is how we recommend you work in SonarWiz 7 if you're going to start with an existing SonarWiz 6 project. Now when you attempt to open this, so we're going to open the copy I just made, you'll get a message that pops up here, and it says this project contains SonarWiz 6 format CSF files, and these are going to be promoted to SonarWiz 7 files, or version 2.0 files. There's a little bit of more information about how much disk space you have and whatever, and if you proceed from this point forward, those CSF files will be converted to SonarWiz 7 format, and they will only work in SonarWiz 7. And that's why you need to make a copy of your project. So it doesn't take that long to promote them, but now we've got that SonarWiz 6 project promoted to SonarWiz 7. You can even see the file I imported here is different. So it tries to preserve the colors as best as possible, and it does. It tries to promote everything just the way you left it, if possible. So let's see if I covered everything I was hoping to. The main thing about SonarWiz 7 that we're really trying to work on is just make the whole process easier to use and get a better result. So by simplifying the user interface, I think that what we're trying to go for is, and I think that it's really important to our customers, that SonarWiz 6 had just gotten so complicated that it was sometimes difficult to teach and difficult to use for first-time users. And now we're really putting a focus on trying to simplify things and speed up the interface. And I think in the near future, we've done a lot of work on the signal processing and algorithms that make that automatic processing a little better. And what we're really focusing on over the next couple of months is optimization to make sure that it goes faster, try to get any lingering bugs out of the 7 code that are still in there. And basically just make it a much more pleasant user experience. I think SonarWiz 6 is really good, but 7 we're really proud of. It's got a lot of nice new features. And we continue to be adding new features all the time. So as long as your EMA is up to date, you can download this right now from our website, and I'll show you the link in a moment. So, oops, let's see here. I wanted to, oh, that was one more thing I had to show you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Seabed classification. This is an area that really depends on the signal processing and the quality of your data. So we can now do things a little bit differently than we used to do with the old format, and I think the results are a lot better. But it's still kind of, Seabed characterization really depends on whether you collected amplitude data specifically for doing characterization. If you have not focused on that, if you're focusing on bathymetry or some other object, you may not collect data that's completely suitable. But this data set here, this side scan file, set of files, works really well. So where all of our side scan customers will get, and bathymetry customers get the Seabed characterization right now as built into the product. And we've added a couple of new things, or new features. The first one that I want to show you, it has to do with generating some auxiliary data. So here what I'm showing you is a bathymetry surface. It has, we have got some targets in here, and we can see them in the side scan when they're laid over the top. But bathymetry directly is not something that you often classify with. You need other products. So if you have a bathymetric grid from some third-party source, or whether you made it, you can make it with your own bathymetry data in SonarWiz, or you can bring it in from somewhere else. We can import those grids and then calculate some of these statistical properties that help us do better Seabed classifications. You can calculate your aspect, the roughness of the terrain, the slope of the terrain. There's two topographic properties called the terrain ruggedness index and the topographic position index that are both they're used by biologists to try to characterize the seabed. Once those grids are created, I can show you an example of the slope grid, for example. Here's a slope grid. This isn't bathymetry. The red color means it's mostly flat, and the blue colors means it's relatively steep. Now we can use that for Seabed characterization. So if we turn our side scan files back on and go to Seabed characterization, this is the new interface for the Seabed characterization tool. The first thing you do on the left-hand window is select the file that you want to characterize. There's a training step, so we're going to go through what a characteristic file and try to find basically all the patches of different sediment types that you expect to find. And then the SonarWiz will build a waterfall example here that shows you both the original waterfall data, so this is the sonar data just plotted in black and white. And then on the right-hand side it shows you the characterization that it made from that data. And you can kind of scroll around and take a look at this. You can train on multiple files. If you have a very large project, you can select 4 or 5 files that are that characterize your area, and then click the classification button, and it will go through and create the classes. The actual process is a little slow on side scan files because there's so much information that we're processing. I've already pre-computed this stuff, and I can just show you the results. What you get out of this is a shapefile at the end, or a polygon, that has characterized the sediment. Let me change the colors here. So the green, I don't know how well this green circle is coming through, but it's basically outlined all of these bright areas that were rock and separated them into classes out from the muddy or sandy areas that are outside of that. Now the characterization works on image processing principles. It doesn't actually know what the sediment type is that you're trying to characterize underneath. It's up to you to figure out what those things actually are. What SonarWiz is doing is it's telling you that these classes that are rocky are all similar to each other, and these classes that are sandy are similar to each other, and they're distinct from the rock. The underlying algorithm is kind of, you can sort of see how it works by just looking at the results. So if we turn off the sonar data and just look at the classification, you can see it's kind of stripy. So it's gone down the track line in skipping over every few pings, and it makes a classification call. And then it's plotted by color here. So areas that are yellow are one class of data, and areas that are red are another. Then there's another filtering step that goes through and tries to remove confusion and disambiguates or removes kind of the areas where there's lots of overlapping decisions. It's got to make a choice about what class to call something. So the next step is this filtering step, and it creates something that looks like this. And then finally, it cleans up the classes with options you control, and you get a grid that's kind of classified into different classes. And this is very close to the actual data set itself. So it tends to work best on data sets that have distinct characteristics, areas that are visually distinct from each other. We have differences in amplitude or strong differences in texture. That's where the sediment or the Seabed characterization tool works best. It's an image processing technique. It's not using the acoustics directly. But it is a little, it's not just straight up doing it like you would get in an ARC or a GIS or something, because it's actually working on the data while it's still in the reference frame of the sonar. So while it is an image processing process, we're looking at the actual pixels of amplitude data, we're doing it while it's still in the reference frame of the sonar, where we can remove things like nadir artifacts and far field artifacts, and so those don't get into the data set or the classification at all. So that's a new tool that's available for SonarWiz 7 as well. So between the 3D views, the new properties window, the Seabed characterization, and just small refinements throughout the whole product, especially being able to do direct imports without having any kind of pre-amplitude stuff. You don't have to gain the information as you come in. I think it's really made SonarWiz easier to use, and the results are a lot better. So that is kind of a brief introduction to what SonarWiz has, and if there's any questions, now would be a good time for us to go through those. So if you have any questions, just type them into the question box here, and I will try to answer those for you. And if I can figure out how, so I'm still kind of new to the webinar tools here. Just a moment, we're organizing here. Okay, so the question is, after you've applied the filters to the one side scan line, a couple of stripes appeared in the high relief area in the middle of the screen. What are those from? Okay, that is, I can show you exactly what that is. I think we're talking about this right here. So let's look at this line. Let's take a second here. We got to turn off all this stuff. And actually, this is an example where the 3D window comes in really handy. So there is these stripes right here. The reason this is happening is if we look at the bottom track, when you get down to the air, let's see if we can, you should be able to see, if you had two screens here, you should be able to see cursor tracking on the data set as we go through here. But if you notice, here's a rock, and that corresponds, I'm going to slide this over, that corresponds exactly with these stripes here. And what has happened is when the EGN table was built, the normalization table, I had gone through and removed this rock, and I will show you why. I had actually bottom tracked it like this. I had straightened it out, so it went right through the rock. Now, the reason I did that is obvious in this 3D view. So, all right, so we look at the 3D view, and we'll put this file over. Now, if you look at this with some vertical exaggeration, you can see that where the bottom track went up and over, the entire line gets the same elevation data. Because this is a sonar or a side scan file, not a bathymetry file, we don't have a lot of bathymetric information for this track line. We only have this one bump as it goes over. In a data set like this where it's mostly flat sand everywhere except on these reefs, that can really kind of mess up our EGM processing. So what I like to do with these data sets is I will go and re-bottom track them like this. And I'll show you what I'm going to do. I go back here and I actually flatten out and remove the stripes. Oops, I turn auto scroll off. So now the bottom track to that is actually, I'm trying to approximate where the seafloor would be if I just took like a knife and cut off right at where the rock was. Let's go through that's all of them. And then I'm going to apply this and show you what the change did. So I save that. And now let's reapply EGN. It should do it automatically. And while it's working on, well, let's let it finish. So it's slant range correcting. Uh-oh. Not sure what happened there. Well, there's a nice demonstration. So the, wow, I don't know what just happened there. But what I will show you what it should have done. Let's go to another line. Now I've got my colors all messed up. So if you go to the next line over, you can see where I have actually, instead of going up and over those rocks, I actually tried to cut it off so it was flat. And the EGN, the way it works is it just nicely evens out the illumination. I think what's happening here is I didn't recalculate the EGN table, and that's why it's not working. So if we recompute it for the whole data set, it will look nice again. So I have to go into settings here, rebuild this table, and this will take a few moments. So while that's going, let me see if I can answer the next question. So the question 2 is it possible to apply the vessel parameters, GPS offsets, latency, etc., to side scan files in SonarWiz 7? We have 2 different systems right now. There is the vessel editor is used for bathymetry files only, and you can enter GPS offsets and other vessel information for the like sheave offsets and that sort of thing in the traditional place in SonarWiz. So it's a little confusing right now, but you currently can do that, but you do it in a different spot in the interface. So now at the moment it's done with the Sonar File Manager is where you put those in. So the third question was, I'd like to import side scan generated bottom track depth data into bathymetric data and then export into GIS. Is this possible, or is this relatively painless? So if what you're suggesting is how hard is it to export a bottom track into a depth surface, is that that's what I think the question is. It's pretty easy to do. You can export the bottom track. Let's see, now that this is done, hopefully it'll look better. You do that here in our tools menu. You can go export CSF, and then you can this first one here is convert CSF file to CSV, and then if you have a CSF file, I think this one has it. It will create a CSV file that has all the depth information in it, and from there it's pretty easy to grid it. So here we have all this information on a ping by ping basis for that CSV file, or excuse me, the CSF file, including its bottom track depth. So the altitude here, I'm looking for the column. This is it, right here. And This file, yeah, this data set doesn't have sensor depth, so so this one you would just be getting the altitude out. We're actually we have on our development list a way to, we have a datum correction tool in SonarWiz 6, well, SonarWiz 7 has it also, but the datum correction tool will allow you to apply a depth from a bathymetric surface to a towed profile, like a sub-bottom profile, and then that assigns a depth to the whole line. And we're considering doing the same thing with side scan files that don't have independent depth sensors, which unfortunately this file doesn't have a depth sensor in it, or it was malfunctioning. So in this case, all you get is altitude. But I hope that, in theory, you should be able to do it, although not on this data set. So let's see, what's the next question? Question 4, what happens with import objects that are right in the nadir if the user needs to view them while the nadir of the project is smoothed or filtered? Will this object disappear, and is there a way to keep the object in the nadir while still smoothing all the other nadirs? Well, the smoothing only occurs on the slant range corrected view of the data. So if you open the file back up, in the digitizer, it's still, everything, the original data is all still there. So you can still click, let me show you. So this stuff has been smoothed here in the digitizer view, and here's a rock that kind of got smoothed out. If we take the slant range correction off, you can still see that the rocks poke up into the water column. So if you had a structure, for example, or a wreck or something, it's still there, and you can still pick it as a target. But you wouldn't see it in the plan view. Also, of course, you don't have to apply the nadir filter to every single line. So, okay, so the question was, is there a way to manually adjust the characterizations? I'm not sure by what you mean by adjust. You certainly can merge and combine characterizations. So if you don't like the classes that are shown, you can say merge two of them side by side together, or you can reassign a class to another number. There's also a pretty huge variety of algorithms that are available. I just select the default ones when I was doing that demo. Let me show you, open the interface so you can see what I'm talking about. So on the right-hand side here are all the textures that are available, and there are two groups of them. There's image textures and there's lookup textures. The image textures work directly on the amplitude data in the file. So these are things that you're either going to be feeding in a side scan file, or you're feeding in bathymetry amplitude data. And the options are things like standard deviation, entropy, intensity, and we have a whole bunch of gray level co-occurrence matrices. So contrast, asimilarity, homogeneity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of these things. Those, like I said, those work directly on the amplitude data. The other option are these, what we call lookup grids, and I showed you one example of those, which was a slope grid. If you can compute something and load it in as a grid into SonarWiz, the way SonarWiz deals with that in the classifier is it will march down the track line, and for every sample in the ping, it looks up a value from this grid, and that becomes one of the properties in the classification. So I showed you one where we included just slope, but you could also have, we have a variety of, we compute a bunch of these for you. You can get, from a bathymetric grid, you can get slope, aspect, terrain roughness, TPI, etc. But if you have some other auxiliary information, maybe you've got amplitude data from a previous project or a different sensor, you got it from an ADCP or something that SonarWiz doesn't support, if you can grid it and pull it in, we can co-locate it with as a grid and use it as a lookup texture. So those are the kind of customizations that are available. At the moment, each one of these objects gets weighted equally in the characterization. There's also a lot of control over how those statistical windows are computed. So how many how big is the window that it's looking at and how fast is it skipping down the line. You can control all of that. And this is all described in the manuals too. Finally, the filtering process is actually pretty important, and that's where it recombines the raw data, the classified data, back into a smooth map. And we have a couple of options there. There's a mode filter, which will look at a window and say, give me the most popular class, and it kind of removes a lot of speckle from the classification. The interpolate filter allows us to classify quickly, especially with side scan files when you could have 8,000 or 9,000 samples per ping, or more even, and you're pinging it 20 times a second in shallow water or something. There's millions and millions of samples to look at. So we have some options where you can jump down the line and skip a few samples or skip a few pings and just do the classification, say, every half meter or something. You need to interpolate that stuff back together again. And then finally, there's an enhancement option where if you're trying to pull out or tease apart two classes, sometimes you want to increase the second most popular class and allow that one to show up through the filter. It kind of counteracts, it's the opposite of the mode filter. It makes more classes appear. Those are the customizations that are currently built in. So we have another question that was, is the Seabed characterization tool suitable for boulder picking? It's actually it's suitable for any kind of target that is relatively bright compared to its background. So if you can tease apart the amplitude or the texture from its background texture, then it will work well. In practice, what I've found is that when I look at a data set, and if it looks like it's easy to separate the two with my eyes and I wish I could just color it, that's when the classifier works really well. Where it kind of falls apart is when you see a muddy data set or the textures just aren't that distinct. It really kind of struggles with that, and I'm not sure how to validate that the results are any good. The next question was, have we thought about integrating geocoder into SonarWiz to get away from purely image processing bottom classification? And the answer is yes. In fact, we've been in discussions with the University of New Hampshire about this for some time, actually, and we have considered it a lot. The problem is that SonarWiz main customers are using side scans and interferometers that are not well addressed by geocoder. And we want a tool that will work for both. And we felt that in order to get geocoder into SonarWiz 7, we were going to have to do a tremendous amount of engineering to make it work. The process of using angular range analysis is interesting, and it's something that we're considering. But we're not going to just be able to take the code off the shelf from geocoder and plug it in to SonarWiz and make it work, because we're using too many sonars that are uncalibrated, and we need a way to make it work even if you don't have a calibrated sonar system. And geocoder tends to work best if you're working with a high-end calibrated system, and it starts to get worse as you go further away from that scenario. But yes, I think that geocoder's been on our radar, and we're trying to make it work, but at the moment we don't have it in the system or in our product. So there's a question for the polygon output on the classifier. Is this available as a shapefile or DXX? It's actually available as both. So if you open the settings, there's 3 options right now, or 4 options. You can export those polygons as AutoCAD, DXFs, Esri shapefiles, Google Earths, or an SQLite spatial database. All of those will work. And in fact, you can export the same thing multiple times. So if you don't like the way the original filtering worked, you can rerun just the filtering step or re-export the different polygons, and so it's pretty flexible. And actually, that's an area that's super easy to add new formats. So if there's you've got your baby format that you love, we'll probably just add it to the program if it's easy. We have pretty powerful GIS support, and it's easy for us to add that. But we thought those 4 would be the most common. Okay. Are there any changes to the way cores are input into SonarWiz 7? No. So I think that it would be, that's the sort of question you should contact us directly about to hear what it is exactly you're looking for. I think that sub-bottom is going to receive quite a bit of attention in the next year, so that's something we could add to our development list. If you've got some good ideas for how we should do it differently, please let us know. Okay, so if there are, I guess our time is up, and if there are any other questions, please just give us a shout at the office here. You can get to us from help@chesapeaketech.com, or you can send your questions to info@chesapeaketech.com, and they'll send them off to me, and I'd be happy to answer them for you personally. But thank you very much for watching, and we're going to try to put this up on YouTube so that if you want to see what we went over here again, it'll be available.